You know, sometimes things happen in our lives that are difficult and hard to understand. Those are the times when we get confused and we begin to doubt or we question God's plan for our life. And so I want to talk to you about how we kind of process those difficult things that happen in our lives. You know, over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to talk with parents of children who are disabled and helping them walk through some difficult times of understanding what's happened to their child and in their life. I've also had opportunity to be with the persecuted church around the world as they're living in very difficult situations and experiencing those hard things in life that come against them just because of their faith. Recently, I was with the Syrians, some Syrian brothers and sisters who are living in the middle of a war zone, and they're refugees, and they're seeing death on all sides and experiencing really traumatic situations in their life, and they're asking, why does this happen? You've probably had some situation come up in your life and it's been difficult, and you found yourself kind of asking God, what's happening? Why is this going on? That's a pretty old question. We've been asking why for a long time. You remember when the disciples were with Jesus in John chapter 9, and they walked up and they saw a man born blind, and immediately the disciples were asking the why question, trying to figure out blame, and so they said, who sinned? Was it this guy, or was it his parents? Who sinned that caused his blindness? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents have sinned, but this happened so that the glory of God might be displayed in his life, so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. See, sometimes when things happen, God says, I can use that to display my work in your life. I can use it to display the glory of God to the people around you. It begins to change us and affect us. Jesus promised, as part of being connected to the vine, that he would prune us. He said if the branch is not bearing any fruit, it gets cut off. But if the branch is bearing fruit, it's going to get pruned. It's going to get cut and trimmed as well. So he promises that he's doing a work in us. He is pruning us. In 2 Corinthians 3:18, listen to this, it says, and we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory. It's like we're suddenly able to see some of God's amazing glory, and we are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory. Yikes. Which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. He says, we see the glory of God. We begin to see who he really is. And then it says, we are transformed. We are being changed really into his image. We love Romans 8:28. It says that God uses all things. He works all things together for good. And sometimes we think that means for happy times, for pleasant times, for a bonus for us. But it really says he's working all things, the good and the difficult things. He's working them for good so that we become more like Jesus. He's working in us to transform us. Sometimes I travel to around the world and get to talk to leaders and Christians, brothers and sisters, in sometimes very difficult places. And I always carry with me a little, just a little carving, praying hands. And it's just such a good example. And we talk about that a lot. And I'll often tell them something like this. I love this little carving as it reminds me of what God wants me to be, as a man of prayer, a man who trusts God and calls out to him. But you know, this little piece of wood didn't start out like this. In fact, it looked a lot more like this. It was just a plank of wood on a pile, pretty insignificant. And yet the craftsman recognized something good in that scrap of wood, and he picked it up, he looked at it, and he says, I can use this. It's kind of like what God does with us. That's what he did with me. I was kind of insignificant, laying off to the side and didn't know my purpose. And then God reached down and he picks us up and he has a plan for us and he recognizes our value in him. So what the craftsman did to that piece of wood is he began to sketch on it. He sketched out this image of praying hands. And I'm sure that the plank of wood was like, awesome. I'm going to be praying hands. This is going to be so cool. I have a purpose. I know what I'm going to be. It's kind of like when God finds us and he begins to reveal to us what our purpose is in him. And we get so excited. And yes, I want to be that man or woman of God. I want to do that. I want to be more like Jesus. I want to be conformed into his image. I love that. Yeah. But then the first thing that craftsman does when he takes that piece of wood, he gets out a tool, a saw, and then he begins to and he cuts away huge chunks of wood off of the plank. And I'm sure that wood is saying, what are you doing? This hurts. I don't like this. I thought you were going to make me into something good, and now you're just taking out some things in my life that is really hard. It's kind of what we do too, as God begins to work on us and he begins to ask us to remove some things from our life, to put off some things that are not good for us, not needed, not helpful, not part of the plan. It's a hard process as God removes those things from our life. And then we go, okay, but God is at work and I'll trust him. But then the craftsman takes another tool that's very sharp and he begins to dig down into the wood. He makes these deep cuts way deep down inside. And again, that piece of wood is saying, what are you doing? You're cutting at my heart. You're dealing with some deep things in me, and this hurts. This is uncomfortable. What are you doing? And God says, I'm working. I'm transforming you into my image. I'm making you to be the man or woman of God that I intended. I have a plan. And then eventually, as it gets kind of roughed in and we begin to see what God is doing, and then the craftsman takes the sandpaper, that rough paper, and he begins to rub, and it's really friction. It's irritating. It's not a pleasant process. And sometimes God does the same thing with us. He brings in people or events in our life that just rub the wrong way with us. It's friction. It's not a comfortable process, and we don't like it. And yet God says, I have a plan. I'm making you to be the man or woman of God that I intended. It's a good plan, and we have to trust him. So when God is working in your life and difficult things are coming into your life, instead of resisting it, instead of getting angry and frustrated, what we need to do is embrace it. Allow God to work. Understand what he's really doing and accept it as part of his process and his plan to make us the people that he wants us to be. I love this verse in 1 Peter chapter 4, 12 through 14, where Peter is saying, dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeals that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But instead rejoice, because you are participating in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. I think when his glory is revealed, that is coming, but when his glory is being revealed in us. For if you are insulted or if you're suffering because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. See, God is at work. God is changing us. He's using the difficult situations, our children, our family, our friends, the events of our life, war, persecution, all kinds of suffering. He's using those things to transform us, to make us to be what he intended. I hope this encourages you and helps you to look at those trials and those difficulties just a little differently and trusting him to be working those out for good. And that good is making us more like Jesus. See you.